Thank you very much. Dear friends, thank you for all of you for joining us here in Helsinki for the second of our political assemblies held in this open and inclusive format. Allow me to thank Kokomus and President Petri Orpo for welcoming us here today. Thank you, Petri. After we proceed with the adoption of the agenda and minutes, this first day will become an open event, streamed on our party's social media channels and open to the press. Today will feature two main sessions. First,
Thank you so much, Thanasis, for starting, for welcoming, for introducing our political assembly today. And it's a great moment to be today in Helsinki back. I must share with you that my EPP link to Helsinki is a very strong one. You know, in 2018, a very important congress took place here in this city. And we showed, I and Alexander Stubb, we showed that EPP is a strong European party with a democratic center where we decide in an open competition about the future of our family. And that was a great moment, I think, for all of us. We enjoyed this. After we had already once such a competition between Michel Barnier and Jean-Claude Juncker in Dublin 5 years before. So we are really practicing democracy as a European People's Party, and that is what brings me close to Helsinki when I'm here again today as a guest. I have to say that the welcoming from Thanasis towards our hosts was already extremely strong and prominent. I can add another element to welcoming and thanking Petteri for his presence and for hosting us today. I can add that during the presidency meeting on Tuesday, he was online connected to our presidency meeting in Brussels. And we were sitting in Brussels in our boring meeting room, and we had an exchange of views. And then Petteri was traveling through the country in Finland and was doing campaigning here in Finland. And he had sunshine, beautiful weather behind him. So we were really very, very much focusing on what he will present to us. And he told us, I promise you good weather, sunshine here in Helsinki. You will enjoy your trip to Helsinki. And I can tell you, he will not only be a good prime minister for Finland, he proved us that he is also a reliable prime minister. Petteri, all the best. Thank you so much for welcoming us. You have our full support as EPP family. Finland will be in good hands with you. Dear friends, we agreed to have more of our political assemblies out of Brussels. You know, in the past years we were very often with our meetings in Brussels, and we started this approach in Lisbon, which showed that this is right. We had then one political assembly online in December, and now we are here in Helsinki to do the same. And the idea of this is based on 3 basic pillars for such an assembly. One pillar is that we want to develop our programmatic work. That is what we do this time with the documents presented for the assembly. Mainly when Petteri and also Johannes Hahn will present ideas for the middle class. So what can we do to be attractive to the middle class in the European Union of today? We also have other elements for defense, for example, which we will discuss here in this political assembly. So our programmatic work to prepare our political family for the upcoming elections on national and European level. The second pillar is that we have to do our internal business. For example, tomorrow we will discuss about the upgrade of the parties inside of the EPP family from countries who became now candidate status. So Ukraine, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina, our friends there, to show our readiness to upgrade their contribution to the EPP family. Only to give you an example for this. And the third pillar was, I said it already, to be closer to people, to be closer to our parties. That's why to travel around Europe and to be present. And I have to share with you, when I discuss these things with Thanasis, we were a little bit considering, does it work this time? Because Lisbon was the first time. And you gave the proof it is working. The presence is strong, and I thank you for this. I know that this is also an additional effort to go to Helsinki to invest the necessary time. I want to thank you for this. I think it is good to do so, to be close to our parties and help them in a campaign situation. Dear friends, this is, let me say, what we have to consider when it is about the political assembly. I want to thank, in all these aspects, also Thanasis, the whole team, our advisors, our staff members in the party for their contribution. I think we developed in the last month a lot, not only due to the meetings, but also on social media, professional meetings. The financial solidity of our party is guaranteed. And the party headquarters is becoming more and more a service point for all of you when it is about to get advice, for example, on campaigning and other issues. So there we do our best to be better prepared for the challenges. That is one aspect. Dear friends, and the second aspect I want to introduce at the beginning is obviously the political situation we are in. As political family, we are meeting in an important moment of the European development, and that's why it's important to recognize again where we stand. What is our positioning in this moment? First of all, the most dominant and most important issue historically is obviously the development in Ukraine. Let me first of all thank Andrei Halicki, because we were not only talking about Ukraine in a sense of political positioning, we were talking about Ukraine in a very practical, concrete sense. And we were last week with the group presidency in Kiev, and we had the chance to give again, where is Paolo from Italy? So we have additional generators, electric generators from Italy, but not only from there, also from the group, from other EPP parties. We delivered electric generators to Ukraine, to our member parties there, to assist them, to help them. So our winter of solidarity was, from an EPP point of view, not only words, it was about practical implementation. And that's why, Andrei, as Vice President, thank you so much for your engagement there. We showed our readiness to help. And also the political field towards Ukraine, we are leading the debate. It was Roberta Metsola, she will arrive today to our debate. She was the first president of an EU institution to go to Kiev, to show that we are close to the people there. It was Ursula von der Leyen then leading the process towards the candidate status in summer last time. It was not Scholz, it was not Macron who did it. We did it as EPP. The colleagues in the parliament, I see Andrius in front of me, Raza as responsible vice president of the group. We were driving the resolutions of the European Parliament towards the candidate status, towards the full solidarity with Ukraine. So I think we can be proud about what we achieved in the meanwhile, in the last years on this. Also on national level, I want to thank our German colleagues, because in Berlin it was Friedrich Merz who was traveling to Kiev. We were leading the debate about the tanks delivery process. So that's why let's be proud about our leadership in this point. That shows that we know about the historic moment, and that shows that we are on the side of our Ukrainian friends. The second issue currently on the table on European level is the debate about competitiveness. Next week on Thursday, the European Commission will present a package on this, and I want to underline that this is driven by our political family. It is now Ulf Kristersson, the Prime Minister of Sweden, as Council President, who is driving this debate on European level to talk about jobs, to talk about competitiveness. Other parties like socialists, there was the need first that the Americans present the IRA, that they woke up and they understood that this is so needed. That's why we debate now about red tape. We discuss now the future of European industry. We also make the debate about innovation possible in Europe. So that is strong for us and good for us. The third element I want to mention is an extremely important general discussion for the future of mankind, that is the climate change debate. There the EPP is also in the lead to guarantee that in 2050 we will guarantee that Europe is a climate neutral continent. But we do this in a pragmatic way and not in an ideologically driven way. That is what makes the difference on the party political perspective. And I give you examples. On ETS, on the emission trade system, Esther de Lange was managing in the European Parliament with our team that now we have a pragmatic approach, a market-based approach to fight for climate change. I give you an example for the Finnish perspective, Petri, and I see Henna also in the room from the Finnish group in the delegation in the European Parliament, that when it's about biomass, then we are defending that biomass, is a renewable energy, is a sustainable energy. And we cannot allow that the left is telling us that using biomass is not sustainable on the long run. And also the debates in the EPP, not easy, but the debate about nuclear, I have to say, sorry dear friends, obviously having the challenge in mind, again, the nuclear question is a national responsibility. Everybody can decide whatever he wants to decide. But on European level, we should not take any further obstacles on the table. It should be an allowed technology in the European Union. So we go a pragmatic way, and we go not an ideologically driven way. And dear friends, let's be proud about this. And then two final points. We also had in the last weeks a very intensive debate in the European level, again about migration. Why? Because The reception camps in some countries in the European Union are full. I can tell you I'm from Bavaria. The CSU colleagues know this. Every Landrat, every regional governor in Bavaria is complaining a lot because reception camps are full. That's the same in Belgium. That's the same in the Netherlands. That's the same all over Germany. In Austria, it's the same problem. That is what we are facing there. That's why we need an answer as EPP. And nobody should give us lessons about our positioning towards those who really need our help. It's obvious that we did so. In the peak, there were 8 million Ukrainian refugees in the European Union, and we opened all our doors to help them and to assist them. So we do it, no doubt about this. But on the other hand, our people expect from us that we protect the borders against illegal migration, that the state decides who is arriving and not the smugglers decides, and that's why strict border control and implementing our legislation on the border is key for us, and we should not give up on this principle. And finally, digital. Just to mention it because it's also an extremely important issue, probably not so much on the radar from time to time, but it is extremely important. Next week we will decide in the European Parliament about the Data Act. That is a legislation which defines how can we use data in the economy of tomorrow. And dear friends, that is decisive. That's decisive for the European economy of tomorrow, more than the IRA question, more than the IRA question. We are leading these debates. EPP is managing these answers in a proper way. Also with DMA and DSA, we did it. And one question mark for the future, you know, when it is about the right balance between data protection and fight against criminal structures in the digital world, one debate about child pornography is still in front of us, where I must tell you that the numbers, the increase of misuse of children in today's Europe is shocking when you see the data there, That's why we have always to be the party who finds the right balance between fight against criminals, especially in such a crime like sexual abuse of children, and the privacy issues. It's not easy to be discussed, but we have to find the right balance on this. That's still an open question for the upcoming debates. So just to share with you on these 5 points our main lines to take in this spring now in front of us, for us as EPP on European level. So we are, like I had the honor to say also in Rotterdam when we had our last party congress, we are in a lot of these things, the rock which gives orientation, which gives stability for the European Union. Thank you so much for being present. Let's have a good political assembly.
Mr. President Manfred, dear EPP friends, it is my pleasure to have you here in Helsinki. We have 3.5 weeks to go to the elections, and your support and our meeting here, it's very, very important for us. I have had an honor to work as a party leader 7 years almost. I have worked 5 years as a minister in 3 different posts, as a Minister of Agriculture, Interior and Finance Minister, and now 4 years as Vice Chairman of the EPP. I have seen how wonderful and powerful party EPP is. I have got good friends, good colleagues, and that is why it means so much to me and Kokoomus that you are here today. Thank you so much once again. Because in these serious times, it is utmost important that our European family keeps together and values its connections. But dear friends, I will start with the political situation in Finland. As I said, 3.5 weeks to go. Elections are coming. Kokoomus is leading in polls, but the race is very tight. We are fighting with the socialist of Sanna Marin. Have you heard about her? And the True Finns, members of the ID group in the EU Parliament. Populists from both sides are challenging us. Other parties are far behind. One of the biggest topics is economy. State debt is skyrocketing. The socialist style of spending as much of taxpayers' money before the term ends has only accelerated towards the end of the mandate. The solution here is tax people more and companies more to make up for the deficit they made. Taxing enterprises in a high inflation and low growth environment is a disastrous combination, as it would hamper our competitiveness even more and thus lead to layoffs in companies. I believe that in the end we will take the first place, of course, in elections, but after that the hardship will arrive. How to form a government when the only options you have for the majority government are either social democrats who have gone very far left, their leaders under the leader Sanna Marin's time, or the true Finns who advocate for fix-it, meaning Finland's Brexit, leaving the EU. It will be taught. Besides economy, the other big thing we have right now is the NATO process and preparing our defense and resilience even more. We want to finish the NATO membership process as fast as we can, but we are still waiting for ratification from Turkey and Hungary. Everyone else has ratified Finland and Sweden. And I want to thank you all here for good cooperation in this matter during the past year. We have met multiple times in different occasions and discussed this matter. Our goal is to enter NATO hand in hand with Sweden. And this is what we are doing. With both Finland and Sweden on board, we will make NATO as a lot stronger, actually, and we can make whole Northern Europe a safer and more secure place. For Kokoomus, the NATO membership is a result of the 20-year-long work. We are happy that a big decision was made with almost unanimous vote in the parliament. This is big political victory to Kokoomus. It is a bit funny thought how the Prime Minister party socialist, who forever was fiercely against NATO, is now campaigning in the elections by promoting NATO membership to Finland. I believe and hope that we will remain by the NATO summit in July. We are also investing a lot in our national defense. As you know, we have very strong own defense, but we are investing more. We have, for example, ordered 64 new F-35 fighters from the US and are constantly improving our defense capability, which is already quite high. We are not afraid of Russia. Besides our own defense, we must keep supporting Ukraine until victory, as long as it needs. Ukraine needs all kinds of weapons and ammunition, and we need to provide them with all weapon systems needed to counter the Russian invasion. Ukrainian victory over Russia is the only way to lasting peace and stability in Europe. Dear friends, about Ukraine. Supporting Ukraine also means improving our own defense capabilities. We must produce more of our own defense material. We cannot rely on others to provide us with the means to defend ourselves. We must take responsibility for our own security and invest in the resources we need to protect our people and our way of life. Our storages are getting empty. We need to move from peacetime production to a wartime industrial production. This is why I propose a European Freedom Fund to channel common funds towards growing our own defense production. This would be a strong commitment from the Union to order material from defense industry. It would have to be large enough and time-wise existed so that we can send a clear message to Mr. President Putin. The European Union stands behind Ukraine as long as it wins the war, whatever it takes. Secondly, about energy and sustainable growth. When your planes landed to Finland, you probably saw a lot of forest in every direction. Even the capital is almost in the middle of the forest. Forests are a big thing here. We have over 650,000 forest owners in a land of 5.5 million people. A big topic are also the Commission's plans in very detailed regulation when it comes to forests. For example, nature reservation law is something what goes into too much detail when regulating member states' plans in biodiversity. We have such diverse environments in Europe, which means that one size doesn't fit all. One of the most significant challenges we face is energy security. The European Union has made great steps during the last year to reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuels. However, we must continue to invest in renewable energy sources and energy efficiency to achieve our goals. In this context, the green transition is of utmost importance. The European Union must lead the way in transitioning to a low-carbon economy, creating jobs, investing in sustainable infrastructure. We must continue to work towards a more sustainable future, reducing our carbon footprint and protecting the environment for further generations. And thirdly, global politics and European sovereignty. The United States is our strategic ally, but also our competitor when it comes to attracting clean tech investments. Here, I believe the best tactic for Europe is to promote free market economy, competition, and less bureaucracy, a burden for companies. This instead of pursuing strong state aid, common debt, and a policy where states or the EU Commission picks the winners from the market. The only way is to enhance European competitiveness, and it comes from the markets and viable companies. China is not just a competitor, but strategic rival. Their economic and political system are very different from our own, and they are following an agenda that is often at odds with our own values and interests. They are taking a more visible role in global politics. Aggression in South China Sea is possible in the near future, and the best way to prevent this is to enable Ukraine's victory, and this is way show that invasion will not work. This is why we have to make European Union strong and independent, both economically and militarily. We can't be dependent in China. This is the only way to make EU a relevant player in a global stage. A bipolar world of China and the United States is not to our benefit. We have to move towards a world where we are also agenda setters. So let's fix our economy, our defense, competitiveness and technology. We will not lag behind. In this matter, the EPP party that has gathered here in Helsinki is the strongest actor. We know how to make Europe stronger and better. Lastly, dear friends, the EPP, is the strongest political family in Europe, and it will remain that way as long as we remain united. Let us debate, but in the end come out with a common vision and goal. This is what people of Europe wait from us in these difficult times. A message of hope, trust and stability. We are the parties what can provide stable governing and prosperity for Europeans. We trust in Europe and the Europeans trust in us. In Sweden, our friend, the Moderaterna, won the elections and our friend Ulf Kristersson became the Prime Minister. Our national level and European level, we will be victorious in the EU elections next year. I hope we have a great meeting here in Helsinki. Remember to enjoy. Welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Allow me to introduce our first panel for today, Nordic Perspectives on the Future, Innovation and Foresight. Over the past years, millions of people have been displaced, human lives have been lost, infrastructure has been destroyed. The war in Ukraine has been the latest in a series of events, from the Euro crisis to COVID-19 and the migration crisis, which have tested Europe's resolve and survival. At this juncture, it seems imperative to revisit social models and policies based on innovation and the unique dynamics of each country. But as we all know, change, even positive change, includes an adaptation process where people resist it. So in order for new and innovative social policies to be effective, people need transparent guidance and decisive leadership. And while reaching societal consensus often remains a paradox for the rest of Europe, the Nordic countries have set an example for us all, a paradigm for the rest of us. In this respect, it is no coincidence that we chose Oidi, Helsinki's library, as the main feature of this political assembly's identity, to celebrate Finland as a hub of continuous learning and lifelong development, a place of enlightenment, and to celebrate knowledge and reason as a shield to populism, radicalism, and disinformation. In today's discussion, we will hear our speakers' thoughts and experiences on the different variables that shape the organization of foresight in government for a secure, fair, sustainable, and prosperous future while keeping competitiveness, innovation, and economic growth as the main basis of such politics. Unfortunately, today, Heidi Nordby Lunde, a representative from the Norwegian Conservative Party and member of the Norwegian Parliament since 2013, has been delayed in traveling and will not be able to join us for the discussion this afternoon. Please let me introduce, however, Hans Willmark from the Swedish member party Moderaterna. Hans, please join us. First elected to Parliament in 2006, he has held many years of experience in foreign affairs and defense. As well as being a former president of the Nordic Council. Hans, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, our keynote speaker needs little introduction. Former Prime Minister of Finland from 2011 to 2014, former European Commission Vice President for Jobs, Growth, Investment and Competitiveness until 2019, a member of Parliament for 15 years, and now the President of Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund, Jyrki Katainen. Thank you so much for being here. Jyrki, the podium is yours.
Thanasis, thank you very much. Dear Manfred, dear Petteri, dear friends, very nice to be here. And Michelle is sitting there, and many other old friends are here. So very good to be part of this family again, physically. So I will build on what Manfred already mentioned about competitiveness and economic growth and defending European industries. But before that, I would like to say a couple of words what I'm doing currently. I'm leading the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, which is Think, Do and Connect Tank. Think Tank means think tank. Do Tank means that we finance experimentations and pilot projects and new innovations with private sector, with public sector and third sector. And Connect means that we bring people together to address joint challenges. I will focus on 2 points only. And they both are relevant for the EU's competitiveness and for EU's industrial success. The first theme is sustainability in the economy. I will give one suggestion to EPP for next European elections. How about to promote circular single market? There's no ownership on this concept yet, but when we are the party which is promoting sustainability and we are promoting ever better single market, why wouldn't we promote circular single market? I will go a little bit deeper on that. I've been very satisfied for the work what the EU institutions have been doing on Green Deal. I know very well that there are some persons, some countries who have some critical views on Green Deal for many reasons, but in a big picture, Green Deal has been a success story. It has even waken up Americans. Unfortunately, their answer is rather protectionist. At the same time, when the EU has created new market for all in order to promote sustainable industries and businesses, Americans are subsidizing their businesses. So they are promoting typical pro-business, anti-market policy. Can you imagine? Our American friends are pro-business, yes, but they are anti-market, whereas we are pro-market, because we believe in free competition. So EU's primary idea has been to create a new market which boosts sustainable business models and investments. By doing so, we can minimize the amount of taxpayers' money used for sustainability. The more private sector invest in sustainability, the less taxpayers need to do. And this is a very sustainable way to look at the policy. So the Americans' answer is quite worrisome, and it challenges us. We can't fall into the trap to start competing with state aid, because it would be an endless story. I'm sure we can find a sustainable solution to this problem, for instance, by refining our existing Green Deal tools to increase our competitiveness in this race. But, dear friends, I will tell you what I believe in will change dramatically within the next 5 years. One thing which will change in this field is that biodiversity or nature loss will become politically and economically as big issue within the next 5 years as climate change is today. Within the next 5 years, we are in these kind of events talking about biodiversity and nature loss. The traditional way to address biodiversity loss has been to create new conservation areas. It may be okay, we probably need more conservation areas, but even if we manage to achieve the EU's and the United Nations target to protect 30% of our land and water area, I'm more interested in the 70%. What happens in the 70% is more important than what happens in conserved areas. And if we want to look at or put the focus on the 70%, there's no other way but to use market economy as a tool. Similarly, as we have created emission trading system in Europe, or similarly as our industries have created cleaner solutions to reduce emissions, we need market-based approach to address biodiversity loss. And there, circular economy is one of the key and fundamental answers. So that is the reason why I suggested that EPP should take circular single market as one of the priority areas for next elections. In this country, few months ago, some 6 months ago, the associations of chemical industry, technology industry, and energy industry announced publicly that they member firms will be nature positive by 2040. So 3 major industrial associations said that their business will be nature positive by 2040. And in addition to this, they said that they don't exactly know how the trick is done, but the reason why they did so is that they say that if nature loss gets worse, it will harm significantly for their businesses. So therefore, they want to be part of the solution. And therefore, they expect that lawmakers create favorable regulatory environment for letting them to thrive and create new business models where protecting nature is profitable business. So we need both businesses, but also decisions from political side. In addition to these 3 industrial associations, Farmers Union is very active in that. They are currently developing a new marketplace for nature values. If somebody is consuming nature or causing harm to nature, they can compensate by buying other nature values from elsewhere. So even the Farmers Association knows that if nature loss is getting worse, their business, farming industry, is getting into the trouble. So therefore, who is the only political movement who knows market economy? Us. That's why it's in our duty to raise this issue and bring market approach to the nature policy, which is not there yet. So biodiversity is going to be a big issue for the good reasons, because nature is providing ecosystem services for free. For instance, pollinators are pollinating our crops, and health soil is taking all the water which is coming down from the sky, and there's no floods. If this ecosystem gets harmed, then we are in trouble. This was my first point. The second point, which also Manfred mentioned, thank you Manfred, by the way, for excellent speech. I refer your words also on the second point. You raised the data. Data is another policy area which will disrupt our societies and businesses within the next 5 years. So data is the fastest growing raw material. It is not just digital, it is a raw material. And we have to understand that data is a raw material, similarly as minerals or wood or whatever. And in order to create sustainable market for raw material, we need market regulation. And here, the EU is a front runner. China is also regulating the market, but from a completely different angle. All the data at the end of the day goes to the government. We don't want that. Americans have not started regulating their market yet, but they are very closely following what the EU is doing. And I'm sure that this Commission's data policy will see, or it will become, or it will create so-called Brussels effect. So our data regulation will go beyond the European borders. And that is very important because we have to balance the interests of different sizes of companies, individuals and societies. Data is also political because the fight on digipower is going to be more fierce than we have seen before. Different markets, different ideologies like China will challenge our value base even in data policy. So that's why it's one of the key areas for the next European Parliament and the European Commission to take a strong grip on data regulation in order to create favorable business environment, safe business environment, an environment which is good for our values. So the next Commission and the European Parliament supposed to concentrate on the very fundamental things, that the right to one's own data should be seen as a human right. So therefore, data portability should be expanded to cover all digital data, not only personal data or smart devices policies. So, dear friends, thank you very much for letting me to be part of this event. We need strong position on value-based data policy, and we need market-based approaches to protect biodiversity. Thank you very much.
So, Hans, let me ask you, are good policies the cornerstone of the Nordic success model? Is this the beginning and end of the consensus that is required in a society?
Well, I think that the consensus culture that we have in the Nordic countries in politics have been one of the explanations for the success. But I also think that, as Yrki mentioned, also that all our countries have been welfare societies, not welfare states, but welfare societies combined with very free markets. Mm-hmm. So our policy has not been to be pro-business, but be pro-market. And thanks to the free market, thanks to the single market that we are now celebrating 30 years today, this year, and this is also part of the Swedish EU presidency, I think this is very important. I think this would and should be part of a policy for a liberal conservative party group.
Free markets.
Free market, single market, welfare society, and try to also find political compromises.
So, but I'm hearing Sanna Marin lately really taking on a narrative that is quite different from that. Are you concerned?
Exactly, she's not belonging to this family.
Well, yeah, but I think, I mean, as a Greek, as a Southerner, I'm very interested and I'm very intrigued about how Nordic countries achieve a level of social consensus that is remarkable. I mean, for a person coming from my part of the world. I mean, the government that I came from in Nea Demokratia, we have done amazing work in digitalizing the Greek state. And only to wake up to a reality, along with all our fellow Greeks, that came with the train accident recently. A lot of people are saying today in Greece, and this is a major challenge for our political system in general and our political culture, that you've managed to have state documents being processed from your mobile phone, and you weren't able to figure out where two trains were headed. And this has caused a tremendous social conflict in Greece. My interest in the Nordic model is quite generous, quite real and quite sincere, as my country is suffering from the lack of it. I mean, how do these policies, Yrki, translate or translated into an acceptance that allowed the whole country, the whole society to move on?
Yeah, thank you. First, I would like to say that I very much agree with Hans on the fundamentals of Nordic societies. One thing is that there's no disagreement whatsoever on the basic model of welfare society between the parties. So we all are in favor of high quality free education, high quality free healthcare, etc. So the social model is widely shared. The second point is that especially Finland, which has been relatively or very, very poor country few decades back, we didn't have a chance, any other chance but to invest in people. So the education has been the core behind our relatively good success. And it has increased the feeling of being in the same boat amongst the population. One thing which is interesting, I found this when I was in the Commission and I was promoting trade agreements between EU and the third countries. In Nordic countries, we have an agreement between employees and employers that we need free trade because it's the way to finance our lifestyle. And it's so widely shared that even the leftist labor union is not against trade agreements because it levels the playing field, it gives opportunities for small northernmost countries to be equally on the market with bigger players. And it takes away all the subsidy elements and stuff like this. Only you can sell your knowledge and know-how and products only if they are good enough. So we have to educate people in order to produce good enough products, and then the more the market is open, the better for us. So and then the income from the international global market is distributed quite fairly. But the differences between the parties and ideologies comes quite obvious when we are talking what are the instruments, what promotes growth, what is the role of the taxation, and can we trust on private sector-based solutions, for instance in climate change or in biodiversity loss. So we don't want to maximize the use of taxpayers' money, we want to maximize the impact.
Very interesting. I mean, Hans, we're headed towards European elections. And, you know, in one way or the other, we are obliged to offer, beyond policies, a bit of a narrative, a bit of a vision about where we are going as Europe. There's most certainly, if not a divide, a substantive difference in how the South works vis-a-vis the North. But it is our duty, I think, as member states of the European Union, that we try to bridge this. So let me ask you, what can the institutions
Hi, Heidi.
what can the institutions learn? And what should the institutions embrace as we move forward?
I think that you should embrace the sources for success and welfare, and that is to be the competitiveness and to be a competitive Europe in an extremely hard competitive world. So focus on that. And what is the foundations, the grounds for competitiveness? I think it's absolutely what Jyrki pointed out. I would add one more thing, and it's also the higher education, the universities, the high schools. I would say that all the Nordic countries have been focused on higher education. And as Jyrki mentioned, also free of charge, so that you have free universities in all the Nordic countries. I think that kind of things are extremely important to focus on. But when we go to European election, I think it's very important that we understand what is important and what are less important, and search for the sources of competitiveness.
May I continue? I would like to build on that. I really don't like the division between South and North.
I don't either.
It's annoying, really.
It is.
Because we are in the same boat all. I mean, if looking at the major challenges of each of our member states, security and defense related issues, we are in the same boat. If looking at climate change or biodiversity loss, we are in the same boat, and we have to create common solutions. If we are looking at, for instance, IRA, how to address or how to answer to American protectionism, we can't be separate, or we cannot have separate answers. So therefore,
And the consequences of the Russia's war against Ukraine.
exactly the same. Or even China. So we all are in the same boat, and we need a European-wide solutions to that. So I'm growingly interested in strategic autonomy. I initially was very skeptical because I was worried about protectionism, which may rise if we interpret European strategic autonomy wrong way. But we need to protect ourselves from harmful implications of global economy. And we are open, and we all need to be open for foreign direct investments, for fierce competition coming from third countries, but we cannot be open for third country subsidies. So, or security threats coming from third countries. So that's why South-North division is irrelevant completely. And we cannot mess up our single market by kind of allowing different countries to take different approach in fundamental questions.
May I add one more thing? And it's absolutely European election next year. They are extremely important. But as a Swede, after 8 years with a socialist government, I have a clear message to you all. It's good to have your own government. It's good to have your own national government. And Finland is approaching its election in 3.5 weeks. As I understand, Greece is also going to general election.
Yes, it is.
It's very important for the politics in Europe, not only to control the European Parliament, but controlling also the national parliaments. so the answer to your question, also to, and I totally agree with Jyrki that we should not put up this South versus North, either East versus West. But the best way of that is to have EPP-controlled parliaments, both on the European level and the national level. And let me end with Sweden as the example of Ulf Kristersson's government. It is a minority government with majority in the parliament. So you also need to try to build bridges to other parties. And our current government has 2 EPP parties, the moderates and the Christian Democrats, working with the Liberal Party, the ALDE party. So yes, to bridge over North and South, East and West, between European Parliament and national parliaments, it's good to have your own government.
Heidi Norby Lunde is a representative from the Norwegian Conservative Party and a member of the Norwegian Parliament since 2013. She's no longer delayed and she's with us. So happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
Heidi, what can the EU learn from this fantastic Nordic model that it can implement in the next institutional cycle? And despite the absence of a north-south divide that we Greeks maybe could learn.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, and I apologize for the delay. I think what we can learn, all of us, from everyone, is that trust is maybe the most important asset you have in politics. And also to segue a little bit into a topic that we are going to discuss a little bit later, how can the EPP and the Conservative Party apply ourselves to cater for the middle classes? I think when we talk about the future innovation and foresight, I think we should be very aware that when we have a digital transformation and a green transformation, it has to be fair, it has to be inclusive, and we can leave no one behind. Because what we are seeing right now in the world with Russia and Ukraine, but also between the US and China, is that we have nothing to gain in a world apart. And it's like you say, together we are strong, divided we fall. So we have to be strong together, but we also have to look at how we can include everyone when we are now making plans for growing in the economies to digital transformation and the green economy. And if I may, to just address maybe a small elephant. Well, elephants are never small, but a big elephant in the room. We know that in our economy right now, we have been stepping up delivering. We are a huge energy nation. We have been stepping up our deliveries on gas to Europe after the invasion of Ukraine. And that has led to, and I'm kind of sore saying this, to headlines in like The Economist that Norway is making a lot of money on the war, and we acknowledge this. It is a part of the Norwegian debate as well, and we are working on how we can alleviate Ukraine when both winning the war, but also how we can rebuild it after it's won. And we have to use exactly the transition into the green economy and digitalization to do exactly that as well. But it's also hindering us in doing the green transformation because it's keeping us also dependent on our oil and gas for the next 10 years. But we have done a lot to invest in that transition with new technology. We may start doing that over 10, 15 years ago. But of course, when we are a small population and the ideas and the workforce is kept within the oil and gas business, so we can't make that transition as easily as we wanted to. But when the day comes, we are ready to deliver and renew Power Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, really. So despite all this wonderful cohesion and just like agreement that you've achieved in the Nordic world, let me ask you a question. Politics in this part of the world is very polite, right? It's very tactful.
50 Shades of Grey.
Indeed, indeed. But I think you will appreciate the fact that, and we see this here in Finland. I've been noticing the rhetoric that is coming out of the socialists, which is quite different from their stance in previous years, including those years where there was collaboration between Kokoomus and the socialists in government. We live in a world that is politically more polarized. And I think the European Parliament elections, whether we like it or not, and when I say we, I mean the EPP, our political family, will, because of our friends from other parties, be more conflictual, if I may use that word. So, when policies are the answer, how do you play politics? Jyrki?
Well, there is a lot of cultural behind, of course. So in different countries, there are different cultures how to, or what type of political rhetoric is valued. But it's quite telling that moderate party name is moderate. And it doesn't mean that the ideas are moderate, but the way to behave is moderate. They are not extreme, but they are moderate. They are moderate center-right.
By name and nature.
Yeah, exactly. So I think even the Nordic countries have faced a change in common tone in political rhetoric. So it used to be more consensus-seeking, but not that much anymore. And it's because of well-known facts. There are new right-wing parties coming into the political market, but also social media platforms have created new ways to attack, or it has enabled people to use a harder language. It's quite sad in a sense that in this country ice hockey is a big thing. So if you imagine that you distribute ice hockey sticks to everyone, and then they can choose whether to use it for hitting the others or start playing. There's a growing number of those who have decided to start hitting. So internet is the same thing. So you have a free speech on online services, and you can choose how to behave. But my organization Sitra is Foresight House too, and one of our products is identifying weak signals. And we have identified one weak signal, which is quite interesting. And it's that there is a growing number of people who is getting fed up with this aggressive tone of voice. And we believe that within foreseeable future, there could be commercially viable online platform which is for moderate people. If you are aggressive, you are kicked out. Because the majority of the people are still moderate in nature. So at least I suffer a lot when reading or using Twitter. It's not constructive media. And I would like to pay a little bit money for getting access to the Twitter of moderates.
Extremely interesting.
Hans, how would that moderate Twitter work?
I think it sounds extremely good, with one exception. And then when it's come to ice hockey between Sweden and Finland. Yeah. That's a real thing. Yeah. And then we are not moderates.
No, not really.
I say. But coming back to Heidi, I think that this is really part of this Nordic way, the trust. And you're building trust in society, but you're also building trust in politics. So, I mean, yeah, I totally agree with you. We are quite moderate. From another perspective, you could describe the Nordic people as boring, but one of the advantage with that is, and I've been in the Swedish Parliament for 17 years, it's also to win around the negotiation table.
Exactly.
And because that is parliamentarianism, is politics. And you do it by building trust also to other parties and to other politicians, especially in those times. When we are discussing the security challenge, when we're building up our defense forces, it's extremely important as part of the resilience in a society that you also have this kind of trust between politicians from different angles of the aisle.
And that was
how do you deal with trust when you have to deal with extremes?
Well, that was kind of the point I was trying to make. I think that we are maybe missing some of the point, because we talk about what is happening now of polarization. But polarization has happened because there has been some political issues that we haven't been able to address. For example, more immigration. Immigration can be of a greater good, but it has to be regulated and handled in a certain way in order to get acceptance of the people that are affected by it, whether there is the migrants or the country accepting them. In the globalization and digitalization, we've seen a massive loss of jobs, which has been a good for many people that has been in the good end of those policies, having goods and services, better goods and services, cheaper, but a lot of people also lost their jobs. And problems created by politics and not addressed by policies will, after a while, create populism if we cannot answer these these problems. So whether you're on Twitter or you're meeting with your peers or people in the streets, we need to be able to address the problems that they feel. If not, we are also continuing to create populism. And again, bridging over to the other topic that we are going to discuss later on how we can address the middle classes and be a party of the real people's parties. I think this is what we need to do, and this is what we need to be aware of. We need to be aware of what actually creates, thank you, populism. Not just talk about what populism do to us. And we see it in our countries as well, stable democracies where you've had moderate center-left, center-right parties leading the countries, but we also see now a growth of extremes on both sides. And I think one of the reasons why that is that, if we can be quite honest amongst ourselves, is that we haven't been able to address these topics quick enough in order to suppress populism. And that's on us as center-right parties, because we have the solutions, if we think about it. And that is what you say, Hans. It's important that our parties are in the national leadership as well, as we see in Norway now run by Social Democrats, and it's not going very well.
Indeed. A round of final thoughts. Jyrki.
Final thoughts on what? On everything.
Anything you want.
I would like to come back to what I started with. I do hope that EPP would be seen as a progressive political force in Europe. We have classically been a progressive political force, and being progressive political force means that we are ready to challenge current way of thinking, and we are ready to identify the major challenges, even if they were not traditionally our core business. I come back to this biodiversity issue. Believe me, within the next 5 years, it's going to be as big issue as climate change is today. And classic answer to this is to establish new conservation areas. It may be okay or needed, but without market forces, we can't address biodiversity loss. So we need market-based approaches. And here we come to the picture. Our farmers are interested in that. So this is what I call to be progressive. Try to challenge current way of thinking and bring and devise solutions that are crucial for our societies, for our economy, for our people. Second thing, and I'm very glad that Manfred raised this issue in today's interview in our biggest daily, it's defense. So we know that the NATO is EU's defense organization, but there are lots of things what the EU can do together below the threshold of Article 5 of NATO. All the area of cybersecurity, which was one of your points, Manfred. Also, we need to enhance our defense procurement system. It doesn't make any sense that 27 member states are procuring all the same stuff, one by one. So we need better public policies, European policies on that. And it's our duty again. Who could be more interested in this field than us? And finally, we have to take a strong view on data policies to protect individuals, but also to protect market. Because currently we are heading towards the oligopolistic market where tech giants are defining how data can be used, and this will lead to the shrinking innovation development. So we need to protect fierce competition on data policy at the same time when we are protecting our value-based approach on human rights.
Hans?
Well, I have extremely little to add to both Heidi and Jyrki. I think that they are pointing to some very important direction. And as an ID-based politicians, this is really, truly liberal conservative values. So I think it's very important. Coming back to those kind of things as the national elections, I think the most important thing is that you are delivering on what you are saying. So, and that is also a way of building trust, trust to the people, trust to the electorate, trust to others. And to use the 30 seconds that I maybe have left, I also want to thank all of you that are part of one of the 28 countries that already had ratified Finland and Sweden's application to NATO. Because, as Jyrki said, this is extremely important for the security in our continent. And hopefully, the Vilnius summit in July is going to be a way of showing this unity between 32 NATO countries, unity inside Europe, unity between the European continent and North America, and most important, unity with Ukraine.
Thank you. Heidi, final word to you.
Well, on my behalf, I can't say how much joy it will be for Norway to welcome Finland and Sweden into NATO. And I'm really sad to say that as also the chairman of the European movement in Norway, that we unfortunately haven't been able to use this situation to do what you have done in order to get the European question back on the agenda in Norway. Because usually, as I sometimes say, this would be the time for us to enter into the Union and take our place around the table where we rightly belong, and also be a part of the solution, not just standing outside. And there are office space ready for us after the Brits left. So this should be an easy way in.
Thank you all very much. Jyrki, Hans, Heidi, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, our next session is a high-level panel on security and defense. The time and our location here in Helsinki today could not be a more appropriate opportunity to discuss this. With Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, Europe is once again dealing with a reality of conflict and hard power. Finland and Sweden's application to join NATO comes at a time when Vladimir Putin sought to weaken the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance. It has brought us closer together. While even in January 2022, only a month before Putin invaded Ukraine, Sanna Marin said that NATO membership was unlikely in her term. What an amazing political instinct. Now she's pushing to champion it. But the Finnish people know. They know well that it is Kokoomus who stood behind Finland's NATO membership, has pushed hard for NATO's membership for more than 16 years. Today, our speakers will address this reality. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome to the stage the European People's Party President Manfred Weber, European Parliament President Roberta Metsola, and Kokoomus Party President Petteri Orpo. Here today as our guest, an expert to moderate this panel on security and defense, please let me introduce Teija Tilikainen. Teija is the director of the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. Teija, please join the panel. Teija, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Distinguished Presidents, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a worst ever security environment in Europe in the whole post-war era. Russia started a war of aggression against Ukraine, and is violating the rules and norms of international law on a daily basis. Whenever the war ends, and we don't know how it will end, there is no fast way back to a normal relationship between Russia on the one hand and the European Union or the broader West on the other. There will be a lot of distrust, insecurity, a need for Europe and the transatlantic community to adjust, and not only to adjust to this new reality, but also to cope with it. There will be a very difficult future in these terms ahead of us. And the question now is, how are we as Europeans, as members of the democratic world, going to protect our societies and our values in such an environment? What does this new unstable security environment require from our countries at the national level? Or what does it require from us at the level of the European Union and NATO? What are the changes needed in the framework of the EU's security and defense policy, or policies more in general, in the short term or in a more longer term? I want to make an observation here. We have been developing the EU's security and defense policy, its defense policy in the broad sense, in a very peaceful environment. It has been relatively easy to develop instruments for security and defense when there is no immediate threats. We are in a difficult environment, or different environment now, when we have a clear threat. This is a turning point in these terms in Europe's security landscape. So these questions, the future, our resources, what is required from us in terms of capabilities, decisions, new instruments, these are the questions that I have the pleasure to discuss with the panel, and I will give the floor to our three presidents next for 10 minutes each. Mr. Weber will start, then Mrs. Metsola, and finally Mr. Orpo. And then I'm going to engage the presidents into a discussion about these questions. Mr. Weber, the floor is yours.
So before I contribute to some thoughts for this debate about defense, let me officially now, among us in the Political Assembly of the EPP, welcome, and it's a big honor that she is here, and she's paying also tribute to our assembly, our president, if I may say so, of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. Roberta, great to have you among us. It's a great honor for us. Thank you so much. First, there is no better place than Finland to discuss the issue about defense, about the future of our community. Why? Because the newly born democracy was already facing 1939, the invasion from the Russians to take away the achievements of what it means to be in a free and democratic, to live in a free and democratic society. And they fought. Stalin and Putin made in a way the same mistake. They underestimated the will and the strength of those who want to live in freedom. I think that is what we can learn here in Finland and what we can see in Ukraine today. Finland is today a lighthouse of freedom and democracy. That's why it's good to be here as a starting point. The second thing is, from a party point of view, Thanasis mentioned already that Kokoomus here in Finland always fought for NATO membership. They always were on the right side of history. Others finally changed. That's why congratulations to our Finnish friends that they had always a clear idea about security and the future of Finland in this regard. I can also underline the socialists on European level made a lot of these difficult decisions We spoke already about the Finnish socialists, but I can also mention again our German socialists, Olaf Scholz, as acting Chancellor of Germany. I can tell you when we did last time in Germany campaign, in regard to all the German friends who are here, then the German Chancellor from the Socialists, today's German Chancellor, said publicly that the 2% is probably not anymore needed. And we had a debate about whether we should use drones in Germany. You may remember in the last electoral campaign, and the socialists refused, no, drones are not necessary in such a peaceful world. That was in a way the messaging of socialists. And on European level, the Greens are regularly not supporting any kind of investment and financing of European defense pillar when we talk about the budget on European level. That's a reality on the left side of the House. That's why politically it is our issue, and we have a positive history in regard to this. The third point I want to make is now to be practical on the concrete issues we have to do on European level. We all share what also Jyrki said, that the fundamental principle is always NATO, and that is what we should invest in. I want to underline that obviously our American friends are more and more occupied by what is happening on the Asian side of the world, so on the other side of this globe. That's why it's obvious that we have to take over more responsibility from an EU side. And the activity on defense on European level can also be a bridge for the countries in the European Union who are today defined as neutral countries. I met on Monday evening in a dinner Leo Varadkar in Ireland, for example. You know they are a neutral country until now. Also Austria still keeps this approach, but they are committed to contribute to a European defense pillar. So it can help to bridge also the aspects towards the still ongoing as neutral countries. And I also want to say that the NATO question is also important in regard to Ukraine. We want to see that Sweden and Finland will join in the Vilnius summit finally as full members. But I also want to express my personal opinion towards the NATO question for Ukraine. Dear friends, having Russia as neighbor, and if nothing is changing in Russia, then we have to consider how a long-term stability and security solution for Europe can look like after hopefully Ukraine have won the war. And such a situation, such a future situation, I think it is impossible to consider this without any NATO consideration. I think personally, that's my personal opinion, I know there is a lot of discussion still going on in the EPP framework, but for me personally, I think we have to heal in a way the mistakes we made in Bucharest when the first time Ukraine was applying for NATO membership. So there are still a lot of discussions going on, but we have to consider this. Well, when we are concrete, then we have to talk about cyber defense, brigade for the European Union. We have to talk about a joint missile defense system for the European Union. It makes only sense to do it together on European level. We have to talk about the joint actions in our neighborhood, consider what is going on in the Sahel zone, for example. And we have to also consider the French offer to have a joint nuclear strategy for the future of the European Union. All these aspects are now on the table, and as EPP, we have to discuss it now. And very practically speaking, we need a joint procurement, we need joint investments, joint research on military defense aspects, like we did it decades ago with the Airbus approach on the civil use for planes. Dear friends, a final aspect, what we have to do from my side is that we also have to consider to change our decision-making rules for foreign affairs issues. One side is military power, and the second side is to talk about foreign affairs. You know, we have currently in the Lisbon Treaties the rule that we only can act if we have unanimous decision on the foreign affairs side. And let's be honest, in the last year, when we were discussing the 10 sanction packets towards Russia, a lot of our foreign ministers always have in their mind, can we propose something for a package, for a sanctions package towards Putin? And will this fly, having some countries like Hungary in mind? That was always in the back of the mind of the thinking of the people. And let me be clear, I think we have to change things. I think we have to be clear that in the future the European Union must act, and I want to see a Europe acting without being blocked by people like Viktor Orban in Hungary. I want to see this. That's why let's be brave on this. Dear friends, it's a historic moment we are in, and probably it's not the first time that we have this historic moment, because already predecessors of us in this EPP family discussed about building up a defense pillar. It was the original idea from Konrad Adenauer, de Gasperi and Schuman to start with the European army. That was the original idea to found this European Union, basically. They didn't manage it finally, and now we are coming back to this. Now it's a historic moment to do the next steps, to build up a European defense pillar, a reasonable one, a practical one. We have to do it now, and the EPP must lead it. Thank you so much.
Please.
Hyvää iltapäivää, dear Manfred, dear Petteri, ladies and gentlemen. Manfred, thank you for inviting us and sharing your insights with us. Thank you, Petteri, for having us here in beautiful Helsinki, for your foresight and for your stoic, consistent stance on the need for Finland and Europe to get serious on security and defense, to build a system that complements NATO. Thank you, Petteri, for your leadership. Dear colleagues, dear friends, we are living in times of change, times when it is important for us to come together, to be strategic on deciding about the direction that we want to take, what we want to achieve, and how we will get there together. We are building a common European future. Today we need to talk about Europe's security and defense more than ever, and we need to talk about Ukraine under continued attack. Russia's illegal, brutal invasion of sovereign Ukraine has been raging for over a year now. And it proves to us daily that Europe's security architecture is at stake and that we need to show foresight to deliver a real European security and defense union. When the Versailles Declaration was adopted, EU leaders were swift in agreeing on a common policy on Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine and on bolstering our defense capabilities. But that declaration is now 1 year old. And with the prolongation of this war, our ambition for strategic security must persevere, and we need to up the tempo and follow suit with action. I'm sure we're going to discuss this more during our panel discussion, but the EU Strategic Compass for Security and Defence forms the cornerstone of the security and defence policy that we will continue to develop until 2030. We will build on it to make the European Union capable of protecting its interests and its citizens while defending our fundamental values. The timely and sound implementation of the actions identified in the strategic compass are essential, and we will need to regularly fine-tune them in line with regular security threat analysis. Now, if one thing is certain, it is that change is happening more and more rapidly, and we must grow accustomed to this and be able to respond rapidly in kind. The weakness of the European Union's, or let's say Europe's, security and defence lies, as Jyrki said it earlier, in the fragmentation of our European capabilities and systems. We know this, we've been saying this for years, never has it been more acute than this year. And therefore we must act. We need to heed lessons learned from the pandemic and apply them to our security, to joint procurements, to interoperability. There is much we can do, and it is important to make full use of all existing capability development initiatives and budgets in order to bridge what we can say are critical gaps in our operations. And for this, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we must ensure the interoperability of our forces and fortify the EU's technological and industrial base for defence. We must get smarter with our defence spending. We need to create a modular and multinational European security. We need to scale up our production, even domestically, and get more for our money with joint procurements. And again, we must develop our defence capabilities in a way that complements NATO action, not competes with it. And speaking of which, we hope that the ratification of Finland and Sweden's NATO membership will go ahead. And it is good news that last week the Finnish Parliament voted overwhelmingly in favour of legislation to fast-track the adoption of NATO treaties thereafter. Kokoomus has supported Finland joining NATO for many years, and its many successive leaders, Sauli Niinistö, Ville Itälä, Jyrki Katainen, Alexander Stubb, and now Petteri Orpo, you all had the vision to take the party and the country towards a more secure, more prosperous, more pro-European future. And we have to thank you for that, and I think we should be proud of it. Now we need that same spirit, that same foresight when it comes to Ukraine. The future of Ukraine is in the European Union. I was in Lviv last weekend, and it was palpable, not only the unrelenting work, optimism, enthusiasm, and reliance on both Ukrainian and European leadership. There's one thing that I took away with me from my trip there, is that our help cannot let up. Today we are looking at 40% of Kiev without electricity, without clean water, without access to the most basic of supply. And when asked a question as to where do we go next, our answer has to be fundamental. The safety of the European Union is dependent on the safety of Ukraine. And the safety of Ukraine is dependent on the safety of the European Union. This is why it is time to lend even more support to Ukraine in military terms, because for there to be peace, there must be a Ukraine. We know the importance of standing up to an aggressive neighbour that shares a 1,340-kilometre border with Finland alone. We also need to speed up the process of looking at the different steps of integrating Ukraine into the heart of our European democratic way of life. And this also means starting accession negotiations as soon as possible, even this year. The European Union responded to Putin's illegal invasion by adopting severe sanctions on Russia and agreeing to financial, political, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. The military equipment, especially the anti-aircraft equipment that the EU and the US are providing, is working effectively. And at present, an EU military assistance mission oversees the training of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers in our training camps. This will help further. It is also vital for Ukrainians to be able not only to fight against Russian attacks, but also to seek justice. And as soon as possible, we must bring those guilty of war crimes to account. This is urgent more than ever. Few last points from my end. I would like to thank Finland for providing close to 1 billion euros worth of humanitarian assistance, defence material, protective equipment, and Leopard 2 tanks in support of Ukraine and its people. That's no mean feat. Those are difficult decisions to take. But if you look at the numbers of the support that this country has from its population for the way Ukraine has been helped and for how the European response has been seen positively, that is something that this political party can be proud of. And that is something that our political family can be proud of. Allow me to end with a short point on Georgia. I was struck by the video that we saw of a Georgian protester standing in defiance, despite being confronted by blow after blow of water cannon fire. She was waving an EU flag. And as one journalist put it, that was deeply, profoundly beautiful. And I think we forget about how symbolic the European Union flag is to generations and generations of young people who look to Europe as their home. That is the Europe that we must keep building. A Europe of hope, a Europe of defiance that fights against tyranny, that fights against thugs. A proud Europe that stands for liberal democracies, for freedom. We want Europe to lead, not to wait for others to do so on our behalf. And to do that, we need to step up our game. And no political family has more experience in leadership than the EPP to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roberta and Manfred. Dear colleagues, dear friends, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine has permanently changed the security structures in Europe. Looking into the future, the one thing is certain. Peace can only be achieved on Ukrainian terms. The EU is not a military alliance. Yet the past year has shown us that the EU is capable of taking on the role within defense policy and contribute to European security. NATO is the principal security instrument in Europe. But as the past year has shown, the EU has an important role to play. The EU and member states must step up their defense capacities and take steps towards a genuine defense union. So, what are some concrete steps we need to do? The EU must support Ukraine for so long as it takes, and whatever it takes. When the reconstruction project of Ukraine becomes relevant, the EU must take a proactive role. We must create a path towards EU membership for Ukraine. Supporting Ukraine also means improving our own defense capabilities. We must produce more of our own defense material. The division of labor between the EU and NATO must be clear. Both organizations contribute to European security. We must ensure that they do so with a good dialogue. Tomorrow, the Political Assembly will discuss and hopefully adopt a draft resolution submitted by Kokoomus on EU's military mobility. In the resolution, we call for increase to the military mobility budget. Effective military mobility in Europe is necessary for both EU and NATO. We need to improve European resilience through EU's energy policy, cybersecurity, security of supply and actions against disinformation. Strong democratic institutions and trust in decision makers is also very important. Last but not least, what I cannot underline enough is unity. In particular, the EU must show a united front towards Russia and stay strong on the sanctions on Russia. Dear friends, the past year has also been a year of change when it comes to Finnish security and defense policy. As we heard again, Kokoomus has been the main political force in Finland that has advanced NATO membership for a long time, since 2006. We hope that both Finland and Sweden will be members of NATO in time for the NATO summit in July. Kokoomus wants Finland to be proactive and constructive member of NATO. We want to strengthen NATO and we want to strengthen the EU. Dear friends, there is no day that I do not think about the situation in Ukraine. The terrible news, what I read every day, reminds me of the work we need to do. Our support goes to the Ukrainians who have fought for our common values, for peace and democracy over 1 year. Ukraine, we stand by you. Until the last Russian troops have left Ukrainian soil. As politicians, we have an obligation to keep talking about Ukraine, to remind our citizens about the terrible war. We must do whatever it takes to support Ukraine to end the war. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Presidents, for your presentations. I would like to open this discussion with a big topic. It is in this party family that we should pay tribute to past achievements when it comes to creating European security and defense structures, the European Union's security and defense structures. And now, many of you stressed that this environment is not a normal one. This is a turning point. This is a critical juncture. So it is also, it requires extraordinary means, but it also includes potential for that. Mr. Weber, you referred to a number of proposals that the EPP might make on further developing the EU security and defense policy. How long? There is a kind of sense of urgency now, and sense of urgency always enables exceptional things to be done. So how long is this sense of urgency among the European society, or among the European governments and societies? So how fast should measures be taken to strengthen the EU security and defense policy?
The speed in politics is not so much depending on structures or on the question how to do things, it's more about the will. I give you an example. 2 years ago, we had the Corona crisis, a fundamental crisis for all of us. And there was in a few months, we managed to have common procurement. In a few months, we managed to have the Recovery and Resilience Fund, 715 billion euros, the first time also financed by debt because there was no other tool to do so. There were major, even historic changes, but we did it because there was the common understanding that only with this we can overcome this. And I tell you what I have to criticize. We have a lack of this sense in this moment of history now. You know, we have Scholz who is mainly discussing his traffic light coalition in Berlin and is happy if he has a compromise there. And Macron, imagine, Macron said for I think 3-4 years about the brain death of NATO. That was his wording. Huh? That was the Macron wording. And he was in a way destroying the unity of NATO in a way, or damaging the unity. And that's why I don't see currently in this moment of history that these two countries, led by liberals and socialists, are showing the same leadership like Angela Merkel did it during the COVID times. And that's why it's about political will. And we now have to push. Hans said in the last panel that we need more EPP governments on national level, that we can create the necessary political pressure for doing so. But again, that is a problem that our today's leader, when it is about Scholz and Macron mainly, they are lacking this sense of historic moment we are in to show leadership on the defense pillar.
Mrs. Metsola, I perhaps wanted to get back to a little bit different question. For you, you are the Speaker of the European Parliament. This Parliament that we are having in the EU today is a very different Parliament from that the earlier ones. It has much more powers. It has a much more stronger voice also when it comes to many possibilities to affect European public opinion. So what is the message we are getting from your parliament in these terms? How should the EU be strengthened as a security and defense actor in the European framework?
I think my answer to any question as to what the European Parliament should do and what should it do more, I use two words, and I would say be bold. When we took the decision on the 1st of March last year to invite President Zelensky to address our parliament virtually, we were the first parliament to do so, we then went a little bit further and said, this is the moment to say that Ukraine should be a candidate country to the European Union. There was some hesitation, there was some concern. Is it too early? Wait, let's see. But you could see that this parliament was ready to take that move. And we did it. I would not have thought that 3 months later, every single member of the European Council, heads of state and government, would have said exactly the same thing. But it was clear that if the European Parliament would not be a step ahead from a political perspective, and also because, more than ever before, the way we are not only reacting but leading with the political positions we take is because we have citizens who want us to go that step further. I could, always use the fact that I'm a lawyer to say that there are legal obstacles, there is that impossibility to do something or other. But where there is political will, you can always reach your objective. You said that this parliament is different to others, and then you followed it with a positive tone. Compared to 10 years ago when I arrived at the parliament, and I see a lot of colleagues here, also who are former members or current members, it was much easier to find majorities than it is today. And today you will need on every single issue, whether it is a resolution, whether it is a declaration, whether it is a political statement or a legislative proposal, you will need to see where the majorities lie, where the pro-European constructive numbers can be found. Since the pandemic, looking at the measure after measure we have taken on Ukraine, the demand after demand for more help, further reaching sanctions, going after, for example, members of the Duma, identifying other different areas for import and export bans, identifying loopholes and filling them in, we have seen an unprecedented amount of unity. And that is not only because politically colleagues are sometimes fully convinced, but because our citizens are convinced. And because our citizens are convinced, they're the ones telling us to go that step further. The next few months will be very difficult. We have before us hard legislative proposals, very difficult from an environmental perspective, digital perspective, industry and migration perspective, where majorities will be extremely hard to build. But that's the beauty of a parliament that is preparing for the 2024 elections, that will answer to what has been the toughest mandate that one could think of, first with the pandemic, then with the war, and now with record interest rates and inflation and energy bills. So I would say that majorities have been found because there was the political will and because we were bold. We just have to keep doing a little bit more of that.
Thank you so much. There are many questions I will get back to. I will get back to our unity on Russia. I will get back to the EU's concrete measures or instruments in security and defense policy. But I will, with Petteri Orpo, I will open up a topic that is interesting for us here in Finland right now, and that is, of course, the relationship between the European Union and NATO. many people know that Finland has been a very constructive member of the European Union, has promoted more unity and stronger instruments for the EU in security and defense policy, more unity for the European Union in its approaches to Russia. But very few people know what kind of a country, member country Finland will be, or ally of NATO. What is your view about this relationship, the relationship between the European Union and NATO as key actors in European security architecture, and what kind of a new ally will Finland be in NATO?
Thank you very much for your excellent question. But at first I would like to say that Finland has been the member of European Union 25 years, and I started my political career and political actions when we have election for the membership in the European Union. And I have ever been so proud about the European Union than within the Ukraine crisis. How united European Union has been. It has been great to see. About Finland, yes, we have been very constructive member of European Union, and we will be also the constructive member of the NATO. And for NATO, I want to say that Finland and Sweden, we will be the security provider, not consumer. We have very strong own defense. And after Finnish and Swedish membership in the NATO, every country in Baltic Sea region, but Russia, will be the members of the NATO, and it gives us a great tool and opportunity to plan our defense and practice. And we are so powerful part of the NATO that we can ensure security from far north to the Central Europe. And also, Finland in NATO as a member, we understand very well that we are part of alliance. The security threats for other countries are also our threats. And we will work together, and we are also the part of the solutions.
A follow-up question. The Finnish process was very fast, as was the Swedish one, concerning the decision to, even if there have been decades of discussion, but now then the final process of the decision to apply for membership in NATO was very fast. Do you think in this country we have discussed the obligations and commitments that this leads to us well enough among the broader public? Will there be surprises for the Finns and Swedes when accession once will take place?
It was 1 year ago, 24th of February, when Russia attacked criminally attacked against Ukraine and Ukrainian people. It was per one night when Finnish people changed their mind. They moved to support our membership in the NATO. And Kokoomus has supported NATO, as we have said many times today, for 20 years. But in Finland, it was not a question about who has been right or who has been wrong. One day, we all wanted to join the NATO. It was a huge surprise how united Finnish people are, and we still are. This process and how long it takes, it is frustrating. And we really hope that with Turkey and Hungary, we will find the solution as soon as possible. And all support you can give is welcome. And I know you all do your best, but it is frustrating. But for European security, the membership of Finland and Sweden in NATO, as I said, it's crucial. And there is a war in Ukraine. It's Russia who is attacking, and we cannot trust on them. And that is why we have to strengthen our own defense. and we have to boost our military industry. We have to be stronger. We cannot count on United States aid forever. We must boost our own defense industry.
Thank you so much. I wanted to get back to Mr. Weber and to the relationship and cooperation between the European Union and NATO. Will the Russian war against Ukraine change anything in this relationship, in your view?
Well, we are step by step strengthening the relationship. You know that the European Union and the NATO formally also signed an agreement about a stronger and better cooperation in practical terms. Well, I think for us as EPP, it's crystal clear that all efforts in regard to strengthening the European defense pillar are to strengthen NATO. So we build up the EU pillar to strengthen finally the NATO family. So that is our contribution. And our American friends expect this from us. I know that there are in the American debate sometimes, the argument, so if the Europeans are ready to defend themselves, why do they need us still? So can we take troops back to Americans on? Does this weaken the links? I don't think so. If we explain this in a proper way to the Americans, that with our today's investment, we can be much more effective as Europeans if we do it together, then I think we can convince also our American friends that finally it will strengthen all of us. I must also say that in a lot of these new worlds of defense, I mentioned briefly cyber defense. Let's be honest, some of our member countries are not even capable to defend themselves anymore, the smaller ones, the weaker ones. So having in mind that today it's not decisive anymore where the computer is located, whether it is in Helsinki or in Stockholm or in Berlin, it's about the software you have on the computer. So that's why, having this in mind, this new reality in mind, I think it's so obvious to do it together and to do it now together. I think that is what we have to push for, and that's why no competition with NATO for us as EPP is clear that this is a backbone, and with an European defense pillar we only will make it more efficient and to strengthen it.
You mentioned the US and the concerns in the US. About there are a lot of concerns and misunderstandings about European defense in the US. We remember this decade-long discussion about the EU's so-called Article 5, 42.7, and so the kind of misunderstanding that when the European Union strengthens its defense, it's kind of undermining the NATO and the role of NATO. Is this a problem of bad communication from the European side? So didn't we communicate our intentions well enough to the US? Or how would you explain this these concerns?
Well, it's what I assess is that it is a mixture of different elements. First of all, I would say the most important American emotions or the most dominant emotions are the frustrations about the 2% debate, because it was already Obama who started the debate. It was then also Trump and now Joe Biden. Everybody is reminding us, please fulfill your commitments. Please do your job, first of all, in the current framework. And we didn't do so. Let's be honest about this. We were simply relying on the backbone, on the NATO backbone. So that is the main dominant thinking and feeling in America. My more general consideration is that probably Joe Biden, and I think we all appreciate to have him today in White House, to being active for us, really, and to have him as a friend there. But let's be realistic, he will probably be the last classical transatlantic, also historically speaking, American president. Also again, Obama also was in a way more orientated to Asia and the Pacific perspective and that will become dominant in the next upcoming decades. And that's why this is for me the wake-up call to stand up. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to see, we are today in Helsinki. If I may say, we had already once here a meeting between Putin and Trump in this city years ago, where both of them were sending all the experts out of the room, and only both of them were inside of the room with translation services. And I don't want to see such a situation again in this moment of history, where we all, Petri as Prime Minister, Scholz as Chancellor, Macron, Ursula von der Leyen, Roberta Metsola, we all will sit there and will wait when the door opens and they tell us about the future of the European security architecture, and that should not happen. Sorry, we are sometimes discussing the issues of security as a think tank, but not as an institution who has the power to really influence things on this thing, and that is not Europe I believe in. That is not Europe what we stand for. We stand for a Europe who has the capacity to defend their own interests.
I think that is an excellent point. The European Union needs to be there where major decisions on European security are being made, or decisions that affect European security. But it many times happens that the European Union is not there. And then from the academic circles, I hear the argument that it is because the European Union cannot speak the language of power. The European Union speaks about its internal markets, its economic assets, but it does not speak geopolitics. It does not speak the language of power. Roberta Metsola, I've been listening to your powerful statements from the European Parliament, and you have really kind of communicated the Parliament's message well. Would you agree that the European Union does not speak the language of power?
I would agree with the first part, that we sometimes don't speak at all. We find ourselves thinking that we are being understood by using language that is overly rhetorical, full of acronyms, inconsistent, or in sometimes at most incoherent, and then we expect our citizens to vote for us. And we expect our voters to understand where we're trying to take them. But on the other hand, you know, the old-time question of who would the Americans call, I would no longer engage in who that would be, but rather that the European Union as an entity has managed to find its voice when it never did before, and it is with that legacy that we need to push through the most difficult decisions that we have ahead of us. In the first few days of the pandemic, the instinct of member states was to close their borders, thinking that the virus would stop at a police check. A few days later, we realized that we needed to share medical equipment, personnel, capital expenditure, operational expenditure, and later vaccines. If it were not for the European Union, if it were not for the Commission's leadership, if it were not for the votes that we took in the European Parliament and national parliaments, we would not be sitting here. So perhaps before the pandemic, language of power was something far away. But we underestimate how powerful we have been in the past few years and managed to get where we never thought we would. One word of alarm, I would say, and I remember thinking on the 24th of February last year that that alarm bell should have rung earlier. I remember when the US pulled out of Afghanistan. I remember thinking, who is going to take over? For how much longer can the European Union think that somebody else is going to solve or fill those gaps? And here we're talking about democracy building, we're talking about a regime that is difficult, and we're talking about complete suppression of women and girls in a country that we should be paying a lot of attention to, and we do in the European Parliament, but not enough on a European level. So I would not focus on whether we have lost the language of power, but rather what language we use and how we communicate it, because we have the tools and we have used them. We just have to be better at them.
I think we could spend a couple of minutes and discuss Ukraine and the EU's support to Ukraine, but also its promises to Ukraine. I think it was Mrs. Metsola, you mentioned that the EU should start accession talks, negotiations with Ukraine as soon as possible. There are promises made But not only promises, it of course, if we think about the future and we think about what we don't, something that we don't know yet, we don't know how the war will end or how the war will continue. But there are still promises, and they are strong promises that the European Union has made. It supports Ukraine. There are promises concerning the continuation of that support. What do these promises require from the European Union in the near future if the war goes on? So this is a totally new environment where the European Union has to not only to stick to its promises, but also protect its own citizens, borders, territories. What is required from the European Union? Peter.
At first, what should we give for Ukrainians is military and all kind of help they need. But at the same time, we have to give them hope. And that is why the promise, the membership to the new European Union, it's very important signal to Ukrainians. They know that there is a future. But in the end of the day, we have to help them to win the war. And it's also the best way to protect European Union and our borders, to help Ukraine to win the war. If we take it given that war is going to continue, we don't know how long it takes. It means terrible problems inside the European Union. It's not good for economic growth. It's not good for our welfare. Also, this is also the reason why we should help them to stop the war and end the war. But what we can do for our own security, we have to understand and remember that there's also the other kind of threats, hybrid threats, you know very well, cyber, and we have to be ready because Russia is still there and it's going to be there. And if they lose the war, they can make all kind of harm to the European Union countries and, for example, to Finland. I remember too well when I was a Minister of Interior 2015. And it was within the immigration crisis. Suddenly, in the middle of the winter, from far north, one farthest northeast border crossing point, suddenly came immigrants with bicycles across the border. Russia sent them to Finland. We didn't know why, what is going on, how long this is going to happen. I traveled 2 times to Moscow, to Kremlin, to negotiate with the chief of FSB, Bortnikov. It was very nice. But I don't want to ever see these kinds of harms anymore. That is why we have to ensure also our border security and border control, and be ready in European Union together against hybrid and cyber threats. And we have to be ready to aggression from Russian side.
Thank you so much. Mr. Weber, if we continue on this topic, there will be a conflict, a much deeper conflict between the European Union and Russia than ever before. We see the Russian rhetoric, we see the kind of messaging from the Russian regime towards its population, where it is speaking about the whole West, about the European Union, all of us in very different terms, painting the enemy picture. We are hostile actors. We are conducting hostile operations, as Petteri Orpo mentioned. That is the Russian argument that it is the West that is driving these kinds of hybrid threats against Russia. This is the setup. This is kind of the new environment of a deep and broad conflict with Russia. Again, my question to you as well, what does this require from the European Union? What does such a conflict require from the European Union? The European Union that has obligations also towards its citizens.
Well, basically, first unity and will. And if I may point out that what Roberta achieved with leadership in the parliament, her first trip to Ukraine, with this messaging that we are there, the people's house of Europe, the parliament is there next to you. And then the confirmation with the candidate status, then agreed on the council level as well. I think now it's obvious what Roberta said, and now the next step is in front of us. We have to be credible. We have to be serious. So I also had the honor last week to be in Kiev with a delegation from the EPP group there. Andrius was with me, other friends were there. So there, we had talks there, and the expectation is clear. They know they are in war times, they cannot immediately join, but they want to see now progress. And I only can share with you that I believe when we talk today about who are the Europeans who believe most in our basic values and also in our rules, then probably the Ukrainians are the first, because they fight for it. They die for it. They die for it every day. So that's why they are so much committed. I see the reform will. Still a lot to do, no doubt about this, but I see the will. That's why we cannot allow that they are finally pushed back, and they don't see that we are ready to fulfill our commitments. And just for us as EPP family, we also have to reconsider the general approach on enlargement. Let's be honest about this, because the enlargement process became, in a way, a quite bureaucratic, boring exercise of checking all the different legal articles of this regulation and this regulation and this regulation. But we had once a moment in our history, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where we considered enlargement as a geopolitical decision to include 2004, 10 member states in the east, and then finally also Romania, Bulgaria. It was a geopolitical decision to do so. It was a readiness to do the next step, combined with the Lisbon Treaty, with the idea of even a constitution for the European Union, to combine this together to do the necessary steps. And probably we as EPP, we also have to consider again to push for this thinking at the beginning of this decade now, that we have to consider Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, our Western Balkan countries. You know how it was when Macron was even blocking Albania and Northern Macedonia and so on, how much frustration we created in these countries, how much destabilization we brought to this region with such a behavior of our leaders. And that's why, again, for us as EPP, I know it's not easy in all countries to sell it, that this new step of enlargement is now necessary, this geopolitical perspective is now necessary. But we have to discuss it, and I hope we can be, again, the driving force in this. Obviously, if we don't fulfill the promises in a reasonable period of time, then we risk that we lose a big part of Europe, that they lose the trust inside of the European Union, and that is not acceptable at all.
I will raise one more topic, one more question with Mrs. Metsola, and then I would be very happy to get a couple of questions to the panelists from the audience. So be prepared, please. Yes. You can put up your tag or the name. But to get back to unity, Mr. Weber, you said that unity is the strength and asset of the European Union, and this is very true. But Mrs. Metsola, how do you see from your perspective how there has been an exceptional unity among the EU members when it comes to their approaches to Russia? Their decisions have been possible decisions that would not have been possible in other conditions. How do you see the future of this unity? How long will it hold?
It will hold as long as we continue to be convinced that this is the right thing to do. And I have no doubts that it is the right thing to do. Sometimes I get asked questions of when will the next steps be taken, or who comes in first. And I answer, and here I can say from sort of a personal experience, 20 years ago yesterday, my country voted to join the European Union, 20 years ago. 51.8% voted to join. The rest voted against. Those social democrats were against. Today, nobody doubts that that was the right choice. But there were moments in almost a decade from when, and the decade is a little bit of a stretch because there were years in which Social Democrats came to power and paused our accession, where there were moments when we thought we would not, I would say, be let in. And you cannot underestimate the impact of messages that would be received, where would we say, actually, you know, you've arrived here, now wait a little bit. Or you've done exactly what we've asked you to do, but it's not quite enough. And when I hear some of the leaders of the Western Balkan countries particularly, very important summit that we had before the summer, big disappointment in the morning when there was clearly reluctance to move on anything. And there was one head of government who said, what do I go back with? In my country, elections are won and lost on the prospect of EU membership. If I go back with nothing, there is a very happy couple of countries that would like to come in and take over. So let's not underestimate even the transformative effect of the period of time within which, between when you are a candidate country and you enter the European Union. The programs that we have, the aspirational projects that we can build, whether from a research or reconstruction. At the moment we're talking judicial help besides all the logistical, financial and humanitarian military help to Ukraine. So I am, I think, convinced more than I was 6 months ago that we can continue to be united. Now you can call me like this naive. They thought that we would be fatigued in summer. He said energy storage would run out. The decoupling from Russia is not permanent. The faster investment in renewables and interdependence is impossible. Where are we today? Gas storage is higher than we predicted. Bills are lower because we've uncoupled more permanently. Sanctions have started to hurt, and with difficulty, package by package, but they are being adopted. So I think our biggest challenge, rather than on this unity that we have found, and I'm convinced that we can continue to find, I would rather say, how are we now, as political actors, representatives of different political parties in the European Union, going to make sure that the next few years, even that are economically going to be difficult for our countries, will be accompanied by the cushion that is needed for those societal and economic impacts. And once we manage to prove that the European Union is there for all countries, and therefore no matter which part of the European Union you live in, that there is a solution for the problems that you are facing. You know, how many times do we say no one should be left behind? How many papers, resolutions have we written? But we only say it sometimes, and then we walk away, or we find ourselves at the next meeting saying exactly the same thing. And this is where our political foundation and values that we hold so true needs to come in stronger than ever before at the moment. Because the question of the individual being at the center of all our policies does not only apply for foreign policy, but it applies for every single decision we take from a social and economic point of view. And that, I think, is where we can continue to show that unity with strength, but it has to come with the confident ability to continue to take decisions for our citizens. And it's difficult.
But if we are convinced, I think we can convince others to join our team, and that's not something I'm worried about.
Thank you so much. There is optimism in the panel. What about the audience? Who would like to ask the first question? Over there, I don't. Yes, please, gentlemen, please. I take a couple of questions. Where we get the microphone from there?
Grigori Nemiria, Deputy Chairman of Batkivshina Party and the first Deputy Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Ukrainian Parliament. Great panel. I'm very glad to be here in Helsinki. And for President Orpo, as I am a historian, I studied European integration. What I learned that for Finland, it took the shortest time from application then to become member of the European Union. You negotiated almost like 9 months, done. So I believe that's going to be the case with your NATO membership, hopefully with Sweden. So that's the first observation. Second observation, positive from this panel, your clarity in terms of who benefits from protracted war. There is only one beneficiary, Putin.
Yes.
Putin benefits from protracted war. The longer this war lasts, the more it's better for Putin and his regime, and it's worse and bad for Europe, for Ukraine. That's clarity is very important as a next step, what needs to be done to bring this war to an end, victorious end, with a definition of victory that's shared by all. That the definition of victory is unanimous, is consensual, and it's not divides those who would like this war to end quickly, but unites. This is, we are not yet there. I believe that's the intellectual part of this clarity that needs to be done. One observation which causes me concern. It's very good, but we have to help Ukraine to end this war as soon as possible. Great. But the point is, which causes a bit irritates me, and please understand me correctly, that it's in this intention, a very noble, very good, positive, strong. There is a logical problem. It implies that this is war of Ukraine. That's Russia, war with Ukraine. But Putin is not fighting with Ukraine. He is challenging Europe. He put at risk, he threatens Europe as a project, as a success story, as a European way of life. And as long as there will be a continuation to help Ukraine to win this war, the more problematic would be than the positive outcome. It's Europe's war, in a sense that it challenges Europe, it threatens Europe. So my appeal to you also to take this into consideration in terms of the way how you position. And finally, a very short period, because it would help. Ukraine also wants to become member of NATO. Probably it will take longer, probably much longer than for Finland. But there is an interesting argument in terms of that we need to recapture our territory, including Crimea and Donbass, because sometimes there is intention to still test the peace land for peace paradigm. So, but the point is that usually it's a rule. You cannot become a NATO member if you have territorial disputes on your territory. So the sooner Crimea will be recaptured and Donbass will be recaptured and Ukraine will restore its territorial integrity within an internationally recognized border, so then there is the strongest argument for considering Ukraine as a contributor to the security of the NATO member states, which is already in. And finally, the green transition. When people are talking about the restructuring of Ukraine, revitalizing of Ukraine, restoring its economy, it's a very wise approach. You cannot replicate the industry that you had with your coal mines, with polluting steel plants, correct. So take into mind green transition. But the green transition is part of it, at least. It's solar energy and the wind energy.
Thank you so much.
You know where the sunniest place in Ukraine? It's Crimea. So the more sunny days than in Crimea you don't have in Ukraine. So we have to recapture Crimea to make our green transition. Do you know where is the windiest place in Ukraine? It's Donbass, eastern Ukraine. So if you want to capture a wind energy, we have to recapture Donbass also to utilize the wind energy.
Thank you so much. There were a lot of good comments. Thank you. Mr. Barnier. Yes. Can we get, yes, please.
Merci. Thank you very much. I don't know if it's possible to switch to French or not. Just for me.
I will translate.
Yes, I think you can.
Just to give a proof that the cultural diversity is also a reality in the EPP. Could be useful sometimes. Non, d'abord, je voudrais vous féliciter, au-delà des remerciements de nos amis de Finlande pour leur accueil, vous féliciter pour la qualité de ce débat, hein, franchement. De très haut niveau, qui le mérite. La guerre de M. Poutine, elle a eu 4 conséquences que M. Poutine n'avait pas anticipées. 1, il a provoqué une solidarité immédiate avec le peuple ukrainien. Et dans cette solidarité, nous avons, comme l'a dit Roberta, créé le processus d'adhésion que nous devons mener à son terme. Et effectivement, dans cette perspective-là, et au-delà de cette perspective de l'adhésion à l'Union européenne, il faudra donner à l'Ukraine une garantie, comme l'a dit Manfred, pour sa sécurité, d'une manière ou d'une autre. Ça se passera, nous le savons bien, à travers une conférence sur la nouvelle architecture de la sécurité en Europe, et peut-être la création d'un Conseil de sécurité propre à notre continent. La deuxième conséquence, c'est qu'elle a révélé notre dépendance, notre faiblesse en matière alimentaire, d'où la nécessité de préserver une politique volontariste d'autonomie alimentaire et agricole. Même effet pour l'énergie. Et enfin, le sujet de la défense et de la sécurité, avec une conséquence que M. Poutine n'avait certainement pas anticipée, celle de l'unité des pays membres de l'OTAN en Europe, et puis du nouveau focus qui est mis sur les efforts européens en matière de sécurité. Manfred Weber a dit quelque chose de très important. La première ambition des fondateurs de l'Union européenne, Adenauer, Schuman, Monnet, Di Gasperi, ça a été la communauté européenne de défense, que mon propre pays d'ailleurs a combattu à cette époque à tort. Et après, on a passé beaucoup de temps sans parler de défense. On a construit ce qui est aujourd'hui notre principal atout, c'est-à-dire le marché unique. Et on a recommencé à parler de défense au moment du traité d'Amsterdam, puis dans le traité constitutionnel qui vaut aujourd'hui, puisque nous retrouvons les principaux éléments de ce traité constitutionnel dans le traité de Lisbonne, qui est le cadre de notre travail aujourd'hui. Je voudrais rappeler que c'est là que se trouvent les nouveaux pouvoirs du haut représentant, que c'est là que se trouve l'idée de la coopération structurée. C'est là que se trouve une clause qu'on ne devrait pas oublier, qui peut valoir pour tel ou tel pays en danger, qui est la clause de solidarité entre les pays européens, y compris sur le plan militaire. Donc, je crois qu'il faut donner toutes les chances à ce traité de se réaliser dans toutes ses dimensions, et c'est d'ailleurs ce qui est entrepris avec le soutien du Parlement par la Commission depuis les initiatives positives en matière de défense de Jean-Claude Juncker. Jean-Claude a été le premier président de la Commission à parler avec autant de crédibilité de défense. Et grâce à ce qu'il a lancé, c'est la première fois qu'on met de l'argent européen pour l'acquisition de matériel militaire à travers la facilité de paix ou des ponts stratégiques. Voilà. Je termine dans le travail que nous devrons faire. Ma recommandation, c'est que, comme l'a dit Manfred, nous gardions cette question de la défense comme une priorité du PPE. Nous ne devons pas laisser ce sujet aux autres. Peut-être il y a d'autres sujets que nous devons aussi saisir, mais celui-ci, il nous permet de faire une différence à l'occasion des élections européennes. La sécurité et la défense a toujours été dans l'ADN du PPE. Et je le dis au moment où, quand on regarde tous les sondages sur les attentes des Européens, la question de la sécurité et de la défense est en tête. Mon dernier point concerne l'OTAN, et je voudrais reprendre les mots de Roberta, to complete, not to compete. Nous devons renforcer nos efforts nationaux et mutualiser en matière de défense pour renforcer le pilier européen de l'OTAN. C'est clair. Mais nous savons bien aussi, comme l'a dit M. Obama, comme l'a dit M. Trump, comme l'a dit M. Biden, que nous devons aussi compter sur nous-mêmes pour la défense du continent européen. Peut-être de plus en plus après cette guerre. Et donc, je recommande qu'on en reste à l'idée d'un document assez fondateur en matière de défense, qui s'appelait le document de Saint-Malo. Une défense européenne autonome et solidaire. Autonome, c'est-à-dire capable, si les Américains ne veulent pas ou ne viennent pas nous aider, de nous défendre nous-mêmes, d'avoir des initiatives propres et capables, avec des capacités, et solidaire, évidemment, toujours dans le cadre de l'OTAN. Voilà les observations que je voulais faire. Merci beaucoup.
I'm so sorry, we are supposed to close this panel in 2 minutes, so I would now use this. I know there are...
I think a little bit longer we can do.
Okay, if Mrs. Metsola, how about your schedule?
I will leave in 2 minutes, but...
Okay, so we take your question. Yes, please, quite briefly, so if possible.
Rafi Hovhannisyan, Heritage Party Armenia. Thank you for a most informed discussion. The EPP as the engine for Europe's security and defense, I think should look in the near and interim future not only at the mainstream issues but at the periphery issues. The parties that are blocking Finland and Sweden are not only the big dictators but the medium-sized dictators. Turkey, we know, you mentioned Hungary. But Turkey with little sister Azerbaijan continues today to impose a near 100-day blockade, which has been sanctioned, which has been outlawed by the International Court of Justice, and 120,000 people are at risk of ethnic cleansing. This is part of the European responsibility. And this is something that is part of the European charge. The EPP leadership, Mr. McAllister, Weber, the chairperson here, have treated this in resolutions and in statements, but we have not come to the point of sanctions, of calling one big dictator a war criminal, talking about sanctions. But when it comes to the leadership of Azerbaijan, the head of the European Commission says, well, it's a reliable partner because we're repackaging Russian gas and sending it on to Europe. But as we stand today, we're looking at a siege and possible fall of Mountainous Karabakh, partially occupied Republic of Armenia. And if that happens, it will mean for Europe and the rest of the world something that happened in 1453 and the fall of Constantinople. This is not an empty threat or empty words. It will come to hit from the periphery to the mainstream, and this requires not only resolutions and nice words, but an EPP engine that talks about the mainstream and also the periphery. 31 years ago, this month in Helsinki, I had the honor to accept the charge of the CSCE to start the mediation for the Mountainous Karabakh conflict. And with the mediation, the chairmanship of Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the German foreign minister, we were to have a Minsk conference where Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the elected officials of Mountainous Karabakh in the future were to sit out and hammer out a status for a Mountainous Karabakh. That was a European charge. That was a European charge. And Genscher forged a consensus where there would be a humanitarian corridor opened, which was ultimately opened and then closed a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you.
So here we are, and my only suggestion, I'm not asking for any particular action. Perhaps the chairmanship or the presidency might include it in a statement, but we have to move, I think, from statements and resolutions, and the EPP leadership is doing a wonderful work in Brussels on this issue, but we have to not only target big dictators, but the other ones in the periphery as well. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you for that powerful statement. Thank you so much. And the final word for you, sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask about the engine in the title, because that was very good title, but suddenly vanished before my question. So I'm afraid of, because I would like to check how the engine is strong and powerful. I think that we are going in the same direction, but of course timing and speed is also important. So the question is very concrete. Concerning the Ukrainians' expectations, because we have the war. Of course, because we would like to have the war finished as soon as possible. The weapon is the most important help for Ukrainians now, but not only physically missiles, tanks, and ammunition is needed. Also political support and weapon which we have in hand. So, because in July we will have summit, very concrete summit in Vilnius, NATO summit. Are we ready to have green light for the invitation for NATO membership for Ukraine? Not to do mistake like in 2008. If we are ready, are we ready to limit the opponents? Because we know there are many skeptics on that, also among, not among us maybe, but among other political families, and I would like to hear what to do to have this EPP engine really strong, working on that to achieve success, because this is crucial in coming 2-3 months, and I think that we have to, how to say, confirm that EPP leadership in enlargement, in building new architecture, also for the future of Europe, safe, peaceful, and also with the opportunity to achieve development is in our hand, and it will be a positive decision. Thank you.
So much. If you have time, I can give you the first.
Thank you, because I need to step out for
yes,
a couple
please.
of other meetings. I would like to thank for the expression of concern about the use of the term "we are helping Ukraine win" or "you are helping Ukraine." Thanks for that. You are right. Sometimes we get lost into focusing on what we are doing rather than what Ukraine is doing, fighting for precisely our same principles and values and freedoms that we have taken for granted, and that without them, none of us are safe, and that we are all under attack. It is important to keep that in mind in whatever we do and how we explain what we are doing when we speak in the context of the vulnerability also of Moldova, and the strong leadership there that is day after day being put under pressure in order for our colleagues there to push back against. But I think this also comes back to what Michel Barnier said about what is our DNA, and this is exactly what we stand for. That when we talk about our values and our freedoms and our principles, we don't only discuss them at events like this, but in everything we do. So, and I think that if there is one country where those fundamental principles have been consistent, it is here. Now here I'm a little bit biased. I am the mother of 4 Finnish boys, but I also need to be able to explain to them why it matters that this political family has always pushed for the securitization of our external borders in order for safety to be guaranteed within. And there, for all the countries that are looking to join the European Union or are on the path or have a perspective, etc., that is what we need to never forget. And on defense particularly, we are the only political force that has said this consistently. And that when we are talking about tools that we have within the structure, and we need to say that because there are countries that are politically or militarily neutral now, that is nuanced in the current scenario, but we have found ourselves with the capability started by President Juncker, but also in the use of the European Partnership Facility, in now the EDIRPA instrument in the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union, the possibility of purchasing military equipment together in order for us to be commonly safe for countries that are not strong enough to stand up by themselves is something that we need to own, something that we need to be proud of, and it comes back to the European Union being led by people who have consistently said that. So I look forward to being able to take this conversation offline as well, and also in preparation of what is our mission, what are our aims, and how can we, all of us in this room, find a commonality in order to push with our narrative back home. I think this is the main takeaway for me from this panel, and I thank you very much for having me on it.
Thank you so much for those words, and thank you also for your participation in this panel. Thank you so much. Mr. Weber, please.
Yeah, very briefly, only to comment on a few of the, first of all, on the very concrete thing again, for NATO and Ukraine. I said already in my introduction that this is a decisive moment. I myself, I only can say for myself that when we are so happy to welcome now the Finnish people inside of NATO, the Finnish state inside of NATO, when they have the free choice as a Finnish nation, whether they want to join or not. And if they want to join, they are welcomed in the democratic world of freedom. If the Finns have the right, I don't find an argument why the Ukrainians have not the same right. That is my personal motivation. That's why I say it's not Putin who decides, it's the Ukrainian people who decides. That is what drives me in a way. I know the obstacle, I know the problems, we all face the challenges in front of us, but the basic principle must be clear behind. And there we have to stand up and have to argue in favor. As a second point is, having also listened to Michel, I understood not everything because I had no translation, but I tried to follow as much as I can, Michel. But what I want to probably, in a way, consider is that when I speak today with our party leaders in my phone calls, in my private talks with them, I hear so often the argument, not so often, but sometimes the argument that EPP parties are on national level now, in the meanwhile, also perceived as a quite managing party. We are managing compromises. We are good deal makers. We are professional in governing. And sometimes we are lacking the ambitious approach. And I tell you my personal story. I became political in my party, in the CSU, when we had a party congress where Theo Weigel and Peter Gauweiler fought about the introduction of whether we should join the euro, whether we should be part of the euro. Helmut Kohl and Theo Weigel in my country, in Germany, were leading, and that was not popular at all. That was not popular at all. But they were leading, they were standing on the podium, they were arguing, they were fighting for a future. There is China and so on. We need this currency together, otherwise we will not survive. And I think this, and in the history of EPP, we always, like you said it also, we always were the innovatives, the leading. And that is what we have to win back. There's a lot of discussions, first to consult among ourselves what we believe in, but then showing leadership. For me, showing leadership would be the best medicine against populism, if we are capable to lead again. And the final thing is that to do all these things, the most important requirement is for politicians to win elections, dear friends, and that's why we prepare for 2024. And I am so happy to say at the end of this afternoon, of this first part of our discussion, that we are so happy that we hopefully and really can manage to convince the Finns and the Finnish people to vote for our parties. I also have Zara in front of me from our Christian Democratic Party, the smaller party here in Finnish politics, and our Prime Minister candidate and the next Prime Minister of Finland, Petteri Orpo. So we have to win elections. Good luck and thank you for this great discussion today.
And the final words now to Finland's possibly next Prime Minister.
Thank you so much. Maybe a few comments about good questions and comments. First, about Ukraine and peace negotiations. We have experience in Finland in history what it means if some other country, bigger countries, negotiate over our head. The solution is not good. It's not good. And that is why only Ukrainians can say then they are ready to negotiate, and they only can negotiate by themselves. We can help them to negotiate, but it's their negotiation. And for me, and for Kokoomus, Crimea, Donbas, Luhansk, etc. are part of Ukraine, period. And secondly, about the membership of Ukraine in NATO. We are not in NATO at this moment, yet we will be very soon. I'm sure about it. I think that we and Western countries, NATO countries, did mistake 2015. Maybe it was because we didn't know exactly is Ukraine part of Europe or part of East. But today we know it. There is a border, and they are fighting there for our values. So they are part of West, they are part of Europe, and their place is in the European Union and in the NATO, in some day. I think it's clear. And Manfred and all the other friends, we have time here still left, but let me thank you once again. This is so important that you are here. Thank you for your many kind words, and I promise you that we will win.
And I would like to thank our two presidents, Manfred Weber, Petteri Orpo, for your valuable contributions in this panel, and thanks to the audience for your attention. So I close the panel now. Thank you so much.
And before we leave, we have a final agenda point, and that is that we also invite next to Petteri also Sara from the Christian Democratic Party to make the closing remarks. So a few minutes, Sara, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President Weber. So on the behalf of the other Finnish EPP party, Finnish Christian Democratic Party, I also want to welcome you to Helsinki. We have had quite a long day, but also a very interesting day and very nice panel discussions. And so to conclude our day, some thoughts about the security issues. Security, which includes both internal and external security, is the most important function of the state. Without security, we have nothing else. When Finland joined EU, it was actually the security issue which was the strongest argument for EU. It was not the common markets, or it was not the free movement of labor. No, it was security. So European defense after the Second World War has never been any simple and straightforward issue. The commitment of different NATO and EU countries to defense alliances has varied a lot over decades, depending on the winds of a national politics. And as Manfred here very wisely reminded us, it's not so many years ago that the French President Emmanuel Macron said that what we are currently experiencing is the brain death of NATO. So how quickly the times change. The war did indeed change the way many in Europe view military alliances. The unthinkable happened, so our thinking had to be adjusted. The Christian Democratic Parliamentary Group voted for Finland's NATO application. Finland is located in a strategically important area. As a member of NATO, Finland would have better opportunities to participate in Euro-Atlantic cooperation in order to strengthen the security of Northern Europe. The joining of Finland and Sweden to NATO would mean the formation of an unified Nordic defense alliance and area. The Christian Democrats, we have also been in favor of deepening security and defence cooperation at EU level. There is much more we can do together as EU member states. And it is not away from NATO. Close cooperation between NATO and the EU is very, very important. So, dear friends, the common security elements of the EU have been a discussion for decades. The recent European discussion on security policy has focused mostly on external military threats of the EU nations. However, the difference between internal and external security is a red line, and thin one. What we have learned from the ongoing war, or at least what we should have learned, is that internal security is just as important than external. As we have seen, no sector of society is protected from attacks. Russia has carried out constant attacks towards energy networks, electricity, gas, and basic information systems, anything and everything. As we are building a carbon-free Europe, we are in the risk of increasing the fragility against such threats. These threats do not even need to be intentional. Also, the risk of human error grows with technological complexity. We must remember that the first priority of energy policy is not combating climate change, but providing energy for our citizens. Just a few years ago, we saw major European nations willfully shutting down local carbon-free energy production and increasing their dependency on Russian gas. Now, we are actually risking making the same mistakes, creating a dependency of largely Chinese technology and on more and more complex energy networks technology. And we need energy for survival. That is what is at stake. Last May, the Commission Vice President, Frans Timmermans, said in an interview that the EU cannot turn its back on the future just because this depends on China. I strongly question this approach. Dear friends, soon we will be celebrating again the European Day and commemorate the Schuman Declaration. Early European integration, championed by Christian Democrats, brought decades of peace to our continent. The European coal and steel community was founded with the thought that technological and economical interdependencies would make wars too costly. However, we must be realistic and ask ourselves, does that still completely apply in today's world? Can global technological and economical interdependencies protect us from another war, even world war? This is a serious question and a key geopolitical question today. We must prepare for the worst and improve our strategic interdependencies both at all levels, local, national and European, but not stop trading with China and USA and other global partners. We must do all we can to prevent the existing global geopolitical conflicts from escalating, but also prepare for the worst. There is actually a saying that if you want peace, prepare for war. So, dear friends, our political movement is based on a Judeo-Christian values, where the core value is human dignity and protect of human life. And that is why we want to defend ourselves and our values against any kind of tyranny or dictatorship. So let's continue this good work together and let's make Europe more safe place for all of us. Thank you.